The detention chamber aboard the Nexus station buzzed with the low hum of artificial gravity generators. Commander Zektar of the Hegemony Defense Corps paced outside the reinforced transparent barrier, his four eyes studying the human prisoner with a mixture of fascination and unease. The creature sat calmly on the metal bench, seemingly unbothered by the fact that it was being held in one of the most secure facilities in known space. Subject designation, Human Alpha 7, Zektar read from his datapad, his mandibles clicking nervously. Species, Terran. Classification, Extreme Hazard. Recommended containment level, maximum security with constant monitoring. The human looked up at him with those strange, forward-facing eyes that seemed to bore right through the barrier. It was unsettling how these creatures could focus their attention so intensely. Most civilized species had eyes positioned for wide-angle vision, a natural defense mechanism. But humans had evolved as predators, and it showed in every aspect of their biology. You know, the human said in perfect galactic standard, I've been sitting here for 3 cycles now, and nobody has told me why I'm being held. Don't you have laws about that sort of thing? Zektar's translator unit struggled with the human's casual tone. The device was calibrated for formal diplomatic language and official communications. It wasn't designed to handle the strange inflections and implied meanings that seemed to permeate human speech. You are being held pending investigation into your activities on mining station Theta 9, Zektar replied, trying to maintain proper protocol. Your species has been flagged as potentially dangerous to galactic security. The human laughed, a sound that made several of the nearby guards step back instinctively. Human laughter was particularly disturbing to most alien species. It was too sharp, too sudden, and carried emotional undertones that were difficult to interpret. Dangerous? I was fixing their water recycling system. Your people asked me to help because their regular maintenance crew couldn't figure out why it kept breaking down. The human stood up and walked to the barrier, placing one hand against the transparent metal. I found the problem in about 10 minutes. Turns out, someone had installed the filtration units backwards. Zektar checked his datapad again. The report from Theta 9 was confusing and contradictory. The station commander had requested emergency assistance with a critical system failure. When the human technician arrived, they had indeed fixed the problem quickly. But then, something had gone wrong. The station's gravity had fluctuated wildly for several hours, causing significant damage and injuring 17 crew members. The gravity malfunction, Zektar said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Our engineers believe you sabotaged the gravity generator. Your engineers are idiots, the human replied flatly. I never touched the gravity system. I was working on water recycling, which is located 3 levels down from the gravity control room. Ask your people to show you the access logs. This was the problem with humans. They showed no proper respect for authority. In civilized society, a prisoner would acknowledge their inferior position and speak with appropriate deference. But humans seemed incapable of recognizing social hierarchies unless they felt like it. They treated everyone as equals, which was deeply disturbing to species that had evolved with clear dominance structures. Dr. Veltana entered the observation area, her tentacles writhing with excitement. As the station's chief xenobiologist, she had been studying the human for the past 2 cycles, trying to understand how their biology worked. Her findings had been both fascinating and terrifying. Commander, she said, her voice bubbling through the translation unit, you need to see the latest test results. This creature is even more dangerous than we initially believed. Zektar turned away from the human, who had returned to sitting on the bench and was now examining the gravity ring around their ankle with obvious interest. All prisoners were fitted with gravity adjustment rings to prevent them from using their species' natural advantages to escape. For humans, this was particularly important because of their incredible adaptability. What have you discovered? Zektar asked, following Dr. Veltana to her workstation. The human's bone density is 3 times higher than ours, she began, pulling up holographic displays of scan results. Their muscle fibers are arranged in a redundant pattern that allows them to maintain strength even when injured. But that's not the most concerning part. She manipulated the display to show the human's cardiovascular system. Look at this. They have only one heart, but it's incredibly efficient. It can pump their blood to every extremity even under extreme gravitational stress. We've tested subjects from 47 different species, and none of them can function normally above 2 standard gravities. But, according to these scans, this human could probably handle 4 or 5 times standard gravity without significant impairment. Zektar felt his stomach sacks contract with anxiety. The implications were staggering. If humans could operate in high-gravity environments where other species would be crushed or incapacitated, they would have an enormous military advantage. No wonder the Galactic Council had classified them as a potential threat. There's more, Dr. Veltana continued. Their brain shows unusual electrical activity patterns. It's almost like they're constantly running multiple thought processes simultaneously. Most species focus on one problem at a time, but humans appear to be analyzing dozens of different scenarios while maintaining normal conversation. Behind them, the human had stood up again and was now walking around the small cell in a pattern that seemed random but was probably anything but. Humans were notorious for their pattern recognition abilities. They could spot connections and relationships that escaped other species entirely. The gravity ring, Zektar said suddenly. How secure is it? Dr. Veltana checked her instruments. The ring is functioning normally. It's set to maintain standard station gravity around the subject, preventing them from taking advantage of any gravitational variations that might occur. What they didn't know was that the human had been studying the ring since the moment it was attached. During their 3 cycles of imprisonment, they had observed its operation cycles, noted the power fluctuations that occurred during maintenance periods, and identified several potential weaknesses in its design. The device worked by creating a localized gravity field around the wearer's ankle. It was an elegant solution to the problem of containing species with different gravitational requirements. But, like most elegant solutions, it had a simple point of failure. The human had noticed that the ring had a manual release mechanism hidden under a small access panel. It was probably intended for emergency use, to prevent the device from trapping someone if the main systems failed. The access panel was secured with a simple magnetic lock that could be released by applying pressure at 2 specific points simultaneously. More importantly, the human had realized something that the station's engineers apparently hadn't considered. The gravity ring didn't just adjust the gravitational field around the wearer. It was actually connected to the station's main gravity control system, serving as a monitoring node that fed data back to the central computer. If someone removed their ring improperly, it would send an error signal that could propagate through the entire network. The human had spent considerable time calculating exactly what would happen if they disabled their gravity ring at the precise moment when the station was running its daily gravity calibration routine. The results would be spectacular. Lieutenant Kossal approached the cell with the human's daily meal ration. As a member of the triangran species, they were naturally cautious around potential predators, but they prided themselves on their professionalism. They had been assigned to guard duty specifically because of their steady nerves and attention to detail. Nutrition period, Kossal announced, activating the food slot mechanism. A tray of standard nutrient paste slid through the barrier into the cell. The human looked at the gray substance with obvious distaste. You know, where I come from, we have this thing called flavor. You might want to look into it. Kossal's translator struggled with the concept of sarcasm. The device provided a literal translation, but missed the implied criticism entirely. This was another unsettling aspect of human communication. They frequently said one thing while meaning something completely different, relying on context and vocal inflection to convey their actual message. The nutrient paste contains all required vitamins and minerals for sustained biological function, Kossal replied formally. I'm sure it does. The human picked up the eating utensil and began consuming the meal with mechanical efficiency. They showed no emotion about the food quality, simply treating it as fuel for their biological processes. This was typical human behavior. They could adapt to almost any situation when necessary, accepting hardships that would break the spirit of most other species. While eating, the human continued to observe the gravity ring around their ankle. The timing had to be perfect. Station maintenance routines followed a strict schedule, and the gravity calibration would begin in approximately 1 hour. During calibration, the system ran diagnostic checks on all connected devices, including prisoner restraint systems. If the human removed their ring at exactly the right moment, the sudden disconnection would trigger a cascade failure in the gravity control network. The system would interpret the lost signal as a critical malfunction and initiate emergency protocols. Those protocols involved rapidly cycling through different gravity settings while trying to re-establish stable field generation. For most species aboard the station, this would be merely uncomfortable. But the human knew something that their captors had apparently overlooked. Several of the alien species aboard Nexus Station could not survive rapid gravity changes. The crystalline builders, for example, had evolved in a perfectly stable gravitational environment. Sudden changes in gravity could literally shatter their delicate internal structures. Dr. Valtana was continuing her analysis of the human's biological capabilities when her instruments detected something unusual. "Commander, the subject's heart rate has increased significantly." Zektar looked at the displays showing the human's vital signs. "Stress response? Possibly. But it's strange. The pattern doesn't match typical anxiety indicators. It's more like they're preparing for physical activity." Neither of them realized that the human was indeed preparing for physical activity. They were running through the plan one final time, calculating distances and timing intervals. When the gravity started fluctuating, they would have a very narrow window of opportunity to act. The human finished eating and returned to examining the gravity ring. They had already identified the exact sequence of manipulations needed to disable the device. Apply pressure to 2 points simultaneously for 3 seconds, then rotate the access panel counterclockwise while maintaining pressure on the primary release mechanism. Simple enough, if you had human fingers capable of the precise movements required. Other species had appendages suited to their specific evolutionary environments. The hegemony's four-fingered hands were perfect for manipulating their technology, which featured large, clearly marked controls. But human hands had evolved to use tools, and they were capable of incredibly fine motor control. They could perform delicate operations that would be impossible for most other species. The countdown continued in the human's mind. 47 minutes until gravity calibration. 46 minutes. 45. Commander Zektar reviewed the prisoner's file one more time, trying to understand why the Galactic Council considered humans such a significant threat. On paper, they didn't seem that impressive. They were physically strong, but not as strong as a dozen other species. They were intelligent, but not more so than the collective's hive minds or the academic brotherhood's enhanced scholars. What made humans dangerous wasn't any single capability. It was the way they combined their abilities in unexpected ways. They were adaptable, aggressive, and utterly unpredictable. Most species followed logical patterns of behavior that could be anticipated and countered. But humans seemed to delight in finding new approaches to old problems. The warning had come from the core worlds themselves: under no circumstances should humans be allowed access to critical infrastructure. They have a tendency to improve systems in ways that create unforeseen consequences. 30 minutes until calibration. The human had stopped moving around the cell and was now sitting perfectly still, their eyes closed in what appeared to be a meditation pose. This was another unsettling human behavior. They could switch instantly from high activity to complete stillness, conserving energy until it was needed. It was a predator trait that made other species deeply uncomfortable. Dr. Valtana was recording detailed observations about the human's current state when her instruments detected another anomaly. "Commander, the subject's brain activity has changed dramatically. The previous multi-processing pattern has consolidated into a single, highly focused stream." "What does that mean?" "I'm not sure. It's like they've stopped thinking about multiple things and are now concentrating entirely on one specific task." 15 minutes until calibration. The human's breathing had become deeper and more regular. Their heart rate had stabilized at a level that suggested they were preparing for sustained physical effort. Every muscle in their body was relaxed, but ready to respond instantly to conscious command. Lieutenant Kossal noticed the change in the prisoner's posture. The human has entered some kind of trance state, they reported to Commander Zektar. Dangerous? Unknown. Should I increase security protocols? Zektar considered the options. The human was securely contained behind multiple barriers, restrained by a gravity ring, and under constant surveillance. What possible threat could they pose? Maintain current protocols, he decided. Continue monitoring. 5 minutes until calibration. The human opened their eyes and looked directly at the gravity ring around their ankle. Their fingers moved to the access panel with practiced precision, finding the 2 pressure points that would release the magnetic lock. They had rehearsed this movement hundreds of times in their mind, calculating the exact amount of force needed and the precise timing required. 3 minutes until calibration. Dr. Veltana watched in fascination as the human's vital signs indicated a state of perfect calm focus. It was like watching a biological machine preparing to execute a programmed sequence of actions. There was something almost mechanical about the way the human was breathing, as if they had consciously taken control of normally automatic functions. 2 minutes until calibration. The human's fingers pressed against the access panel, applying steady pressure to both release points simultaneously. The magnetic lock disengaged with a barely audible click. Now they just had to wait for the exact moment when the station's gravity system would be most vulnerable to disruption. 1 minute until calibration. Commander Zektar was reviewing duty rosters when the first gravity calibration cycle began. Throughout the station, sensitive instruments began measuring and adjusting gravitational fields to ensure optimal conditions for the diverse species aboard Nexus Station. It was a routine procedure that happened every day at precisely the same time. 30 seconds until the optimal disruption window. The human's hand moved to the gravity ring's primary release mechanism. They could feel the subtle vibration as the device synchronized with the station's main gravity control system for the calibration routine. 20 seconds. Dr. Veltana noticed that the human was no longer breathing normally. They had taken a deep breath and were holding it, their body perfectly motionless except for their hands. 10 seconds. Commander Zektar glanced at the monitoring displays showing the prisoner's vital signs. Something was happening, but he couldn't identify what. 5 seconds. The human's fingers found the exact position on the release mechanism that would cause maximum disruption to the gravity control network. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. 1 second. The human rotated the access panel counterclockwise while applying pressure to the primary release mechanism. The gravity ring deactivated instantly, sending an error cascade through the station's gravity control system just as the calibration routine was analyzing network connectivity. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, the floor of the detention level began to vibrate. The vibration started as a low tremor that most species on the station initially mistook for normal operational noise. But, within seconds, it escalated into something far more serious. The artificial gravity that kept everyone safely anchored to the deck began to fluctuate wildly, causing objects throughout Nexus Station to float unpredictably before crashing back down with dangerous force. Commander Zektar felt his stomach lurch as his own body weight seemed to change from moment to moment. Around the detention level, guards struggled to maintain their footing as the gravity field shifted between half-normal and twice-normal strength in irregular cycles. "What's happening?" he demanded, his voice tight with alarm as he grabbed onto a support beam to steady himself. Dr. Veltana was staring at her instruments in horror. The readings made no sense. According to her scanners, the human's gravity ring was no longer active, but that should have been impossible. The device was secured with triple redundancy systems specifically designed to prevent tampering. "The prisoner," she gasped, her tentacles writhing frantically as she tried to maintain balance. "The gravity ring is offline." Lieutenant Kossal was thrown against the wall as another gravity surge swept through the detention area. Their natural caution had served them well in many situations, but nothing in their training had prepared them for this kind of systemic failure. They activated their emergency communicator, trying to contact the station's engineering section. Engineering? We have a critical gravity malfunction in detention.
Requesting immediate assistance. The response came back filled with static and panic. Detention? We've got gravity failures all over the station.
The main control system is showing cascade errors across 17 different subsections. Inside the detention cell, the human had anticipated the gravity fluctuations and was using them to their advantage. As the artificial gravity cycled through its error states, they moved with fluid precision, timing their movements to coincide with the low gravity phases. When the field strength dropped to quarter normal, they pushed off from the floor with enough force to reach the cell's ceiling. Most species would have been helpless in such conditions, either crushed by the high gravity cycles or sent tumbling uncontrollably during the low gravity phases. But humans had evolved on a planet with variable conditions, and their inner ear was specifically adapted to maintain balance and orientation regardless of external circumstances. The human used the ceiling-mounted air circulation grate as an anchor point during a high-gravity surge, then dropped smoothly back to the floor when the field stabilized momentarily. They had studied the cell's construction during their imprisonment and knew exactly where to apply force to exploit its weaknesses. The containment barrier, Commander Zektar shouted over the noise of failing systems and emergency alarms.
Is it still functional? Dr. Valtana checked her instruments, trying to read the displays while fighting to stay upright.
The barrier is powered independently, but the gravity fluctuations are affecting its stability matrix.
If this continues, we could lose containment integrity. The human had already identified this weakness. The transparent barrier that kept them imprisoned wasn't just held in place by magnetic locks.
It relied on gravitational field generators to maintain its precise positioning within the cell frame. With the station's gravity control system in chaos, those positioning fields were becoming increasingly unstable. Throughout Nexus Station, the cascade failure was spreading to systems that should have been completely isolated from the gravity controls.
The station's designers had never anticipated that a simple prisoner restraint device could trigger such widespread disruption.
But, then, they had never dealt with humans before. In the Central Command Center, Captain Mordak was coordinating emergency response efforts while trying to understand how a routine calibration procedure had turned into a station-wide crisis.
The damage reports were coming in faster than their staff could process them. Hydroponics Base 7 has lost structural integrity, reported Communications Officer Thindel.
The gravity fluctuations caused their support systems to collapse.
Medical Bay 3 is reporting multiple casualties, added sensor operator Vexam.
The crystalline builders in the research section cannot survive these gravity changes. Their internal structures are fracturing. Captain Mordak's forearms worked frantically across multiple control interfaces, trying to isolate the failing systems before the damage became irreversible.
Where did this start? What was the initial failure point?
Engineering reports the cascade began in the detention section, Thindel replied. Specifically, from one of the prisoner gravity rings.
Which prisoner? The human. Captain Mordak felt a chill run through their entire body. Like most senior officers in the Hegemony Defense Corps, they had received classified briefings about human capabilities. The reports were disturbing enough when humans were cooperating. The thought of what they might do if they became hostile was genuinely terrifying.
Back in the detention area, the human had positioned themselves next to the cell barrier and was carefully observing its stability patterns. The transparent metal was vibrating slightly with each gravity fluctuation, and they could see microfractures beginning to form along the stress points where it connected to the cell frame. Commander Zektar was trying to coordinate with the engineering teams when he noticed that the human was no longer randomly moving around the cell. Instead, they had adopted a stance that looked almost like a combat position, balanced and ready to move in any direction. Dr. Valtana, I need a status report on the containment barrier.
How much more stress can it take?
The xenobiologist's instruments were having difficulty getting clear readings through the gravitational interference, but what they could detect was alarming. Commander, the barrier's integrity is degrading rapidly.
At current stress levels, we have perhaps 5 minutes before complete failure. Can we manually activate the backup containment systems? Not while the gravity fields are unstable.
The backup systems rely on the same gravitational positioning technology.
This was exactly what the human had been counting on.
They had spent 3 days studying every aspect of their prison, analyzing its design principles and identifying potential failure modes. The aliens had built their containment systems to handle any single-point failure, but they hadn't considered what would happen if the fundamental assumptions underlying their technology were invalidated. The gravity ring around the human's ankle was now completely inert, and they kicked it off with casual ease. Without the restraint device, they had access to their full physical capabilities, which were considerably more impressive than their captors realized. Another massive gravity surge swept through the detention level, this one strong enough to crack several of the observation windows. The human rode out the high-gravity phase by bracing themselves against the cell's back wall, distributing the increased weight across their entire skeletal structure. When the field dropped to near zero, they used their legs to launch themselves toward the weakening barrier.
Most species would have simply bounced off the transparent metal harmlessly.
But humans had evolved as pursuit predators, and they understood momentum and impact dynamics at an instinctive level. The humans struck the barrier at precisely the right angle to exploit the microfractures that had been growing larger with each gravity fluctuation.
The containment barrier didn't just crack.
It shattered completely, sending fragments of transparent metal across the detention area like deadly projectiles. Lieutenant Kassal dove for cover as the barrier exploded, their natural reflexes saving them from serious injury. But Commander Zektar and Dr. Veltana were caught in the open, and both were struck by flying debris. The commander's left arm was gashed open by a sharp fragment, while the xenobiologist suffered damage to 2 of her delicate sensory tentacles.
The human stepped calmly out of the ruined cell, seemingly unaffected by the chaos around them.
They paused for a moment to assess the situation, taking in the positions of the injured guards and the locations of the various security systems that were still functioning despite the gravity crisis.
"You know,"
the human said conversationally, their voice cutting through the noise of emergency alarms and failing systems, "I tried to tell you people that I didn't sabotage your gravity system.
But you wouldn't listen."
Commander Zektar was applying pressure to his wounded arm while trying to reach his emergency communicator.
"Security alert. The human prisoner has escaped containment. All units converge on detention level 7.
The human tilted their head slightly, as if considering whether to allow the commander to complete his call for help.
"I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Your station is in serious trouble right now, and sending more people down here is just going to get them hurt." "You caused this crisis," Zektar accused, his voice filled with pain and anger.
"You sabotaged our systems." "Actually, no.
I pointed out a fundamental flaw in your systems by demonstrating how easily they could be disrupted."
"There's a difference."
The human walked over to Dr. Veltana's workstation and began examining her instruments.
"Interesting readings. You've been studying me quite thoroughly." Dr.
Veltana was trying to tend to her damaged tentacles while keeping watch on the escaped prisoner.
"Everything about the human's behavior was wrong according to standard psychological profiles.
They should have been either aggressive or attempting to flee, but instead they seemed almost relaxed, as if breaking out of a maximum security detention cell was a routine occurrence." "What do you want?" she asked, her voice distorted by pain, and the translation unit struggled to process her emotional state.
"Honestly? I want to go home.
But first, I want to help you fix your station before someone gets killed." The human turned away from the instruments and looked directly at Commander Zektar. "Your gravity control system has a design flaw that makes it vulnerable to cascade failures.
I noticed it when I was working on mining station Theta 9.
"You're lying," Zektar said, though his voice lacked conviction.
"You're trying to manipulate us." "Look around," the human replied, gesturing at the chaos surrounding them.
"I'm standing here in your detention center after escaping from your supposedly secure cell, and your entire station is falling apart.
If I wanted to manipulate you, I'd probably start with something a little more subtle."
Another gravity surge hit the detention level, this one accompanied by the sound of structural supports failing somewhere deeper in the station. The lights flickered as power systems struggled to compensate for the unexpected load variations. The human braced themselves against the workstation, riding out the gravitational fluctuation with practiced ease. When it passed, they turned back to Dr. Veltana's instruments and began manipulating the controls with surprising skill.
Hey! Lieutenant Kosal protested. Don't touch that equipment. Relax. I'm trying to help. The human's hands moved across the control interface with smooth efficiency.
Your people designed these systems to work with species that have limited fine motor control. But these displays can show much more detailed information if you know how to access the advanced functions. The screen filled with data streams that none of the aliens had seen before. Detailed readings about gravitational field harmonics, power distribution patterns, and system synchronization intervals appeared in rapid succession.
This is what I was afraid of, the human said, studying the information with obvious concern.
Your gravity control system isn't just failing randomly. It's developing a resonance pattern that could tear your station apart.
Dr. Veltana looked at the displays in horror.
She couldn't understand most of the data, but she could recognize the warning indicators that were appearing throughout the readout.
How do you know how to interpret this information?
Where I come from, we've learned not to trust technology we don't understand. Whenever we encounter alien systems, we make sure we know how they work before we depend on them for our survival. The human's fingers continued to dance across the controls, pulling up additional data streams. Your gravity generators are operating on overlapping frequencies that interfere with each other when the system is under stress. Commander Zektar was listening despite himself. The human's explanation was beginning to make sense, even though he didn't want to admit it.
If you knew about this flaw, why didn't you report it? I tried to.
I submitted a technical report to the station commander on Theta 9 explaining the problem and recommending immediate modifications to prevent cascade failures.
He told me that humans weren't qualified to comment on superior alien technology. So you decided to demonstrate the problem by destroying our station?
The human looked at him with those disturbing forward-facing eyes. I demonstrated the problem by removing my gravity ring at precisely the moment when your calibration routine would propagate the resulting error throughout your entire network. I wanted to prove that the flaw exists, not cause permanent damage. People are being hurt, Dr. Veltana pointed out, her tentacles writhing with distress. The crystalline builders cannot survive these gravity fluctuations.
I know. That's why I'm going to fix it.
The human turned back to the control interface and began entering a complex sequence of commands. Your system needs to be reset to clear the cascade errors, but it has to be done in a specific sequence to prevent the resonance pattern from re-establishing itself.
The aliens watched in fascination and horror as the human worked with their technology.
The creature's hands moved with inhuman precision, entering commands faster than most species could even read them. It was like watching a biological machine interface directly with their computer systems.
How do you know our command protocols? Lieutenant Kosal asked. Pattern recognition.
Most technological civilizations develop similar solutions to common problems. Your command structure follows logical principles that are easy to reverse engineer once you understand the underlying assumptions. The human paused in their work to look at the lieutenant.
Plus, I've been watching your people use these systems for 3 days. Humans are very good at learning by observation.
Captain Mordak's voice suddenly echoed through the detention center's communication system. All personnel, prepare for emergency gravity shutdown in 60 seconds.
We're going to attempt a complete system reset.
The human's hands stopped moving across the controls.
Don't do that. A complete shutdown will cause the resonance pattern to collapse chaotically. You'll lose structural integrity in at least 6 different sections of the station.
Commander Zektar activated his communicator. Captain Mordak, this is Commander Zektar in detention. The human prisoner claims they can prevent the structural damage, but they're requesting access to the gravity control systems. There was a long pause before the captain responded.
Commander, are you seriously suggesting that we trust our station's safety to the same creature that caused this crisis? Sir, with respect, the human has already demonstrated abilities that exceed our current understanding.
And they appear to have detailed knowledge of our gravitational systems that could be crucial to resolving this emergency.
Another pause, longer this time. In the background, they could hear other voices arguing in various alien languages as the station's command staff debated their options. 30 seconds to emergency shutdown, came the announcement. The human looked at Commander Zektar. It's your choice. Let me fix this properly, or watch your station tear itself apart in about 30 seconds. Zektar made a decision that would haunt his dreams for years to come. Captain, grant the human access to the gravity control network. Commander, I'm not sure, sir, respectfully, we're out of time and options. 10 seconds to emergency shutdown. Captain Mordak's voice carried resignation and fear. Access granted. May the ancestors forgive us all. The human's hands moved across the controls like lightning, entering commands with superhuman speed and precision. Instead of shutting down the gravity generators completely, they began modulating the field frequencies in a complex pattern that gradually dampened the resonance oscillations. 5 seconds. 4. 3. 2. The gravity fluctuations began to stabilize. 1. The emergency shutdown command was cancelled automatically as the system detected that the cascade failure was resolving itself. Throughout Nexus Station, the chaotic gravity variations smoothed out into a gentle, controlled return to normal levels. Equipment that had been floating randomly settled back into proper positions. Emergency alarms began to quiet as stressed systems returned to operational parameters. In the detention center, an exhausted silence fell over the group as they realized that the immediate crisis had passed. The humans stepped back from the control interface and stretched their shoulders casually, as if they had just completed a routine maintenance task. There, they said simply. That should hold. But, you're going to need to upgrade your gravity control software to prevent this from happening again. I can write you a specification document if you want. Commander Zektar stared at the human in amazement and terror. This creature had single-handedly caused a station-wide crisis and, then, resolved it in a matter of minutes using technology they had supposedly never encountered before. The implications were staggering. "Who are you people?" he whispered. The human smiled, an expression that was somehow both reassuring and deeply unsettling. "We're the species you should have listened to when we tried to help you the first time." Captain Mordak arrived at the detention level 47 minutes after the crisis had been resolved, accompanied by a full security detail and Chief Engineer Palgorath. The captain's 3-meter frame dominated the corridor as they surveyed the damage caused by the gravity fluctuations and the spectacular failure of the containment barrier. The human was sitting calmly on a piece of debris that had once been part of the cell wall, apparently unconcerned by the dozen weapons trained on them. They looked up as the group approached, their strange eyes showing what might have been amusement. "Captain," Commander Zektar said formally, "the human has been cooperative since resolving the gravity crisis. They've made no attempt to leave the detention area or access restricted systems beyond what was necessary to repair the damage they caused." Captain Mordak studied the human with all 4 of their eyes, trying to understand how such a small creature could have caused so much chaos. "You destroyed our containment systems and nearly killed 17 crew members. Explain yourself." The humans stood up slowly, their movements deliberate and non-threatening. "I demonstrated a critical vulnerability in your station's infrastructure. The fact that people were injured is unfortunate, but it was also inevitable if the flaw had remained uncorrected. You could have simply reported the problem through proper channels," Chief Engineer Palgorath interjected. Their species, the Builders, prided themselves on logical thought processes and systematic approaches to problem solving. Sabotage was unnecessary. I did report it. 3 times. First to the station commander on Theta 9, then to your Regional Engineering Oversight Board, then to the Galactic Infrastructure Safety Commission. The human's voice remained calm, but there was an edge of frustration underneath. Each time, I was told that humans lacked the technical sophistication to identify flaws in superior alien engineering. Dr. Veltana, who had been receiving medical treatment for her damaged tentacles, joined the conversation. The humans' analysis of our gravitational systems was remarkably accurate. They identified design flaws that our own engineers had missed. "Because you're not looking for the right kind of problems," the human explained.
Your technology is incredibly advanced in terms of energy efficiency and computational power. But it's also fragile in ways you don't recognize because your species evolved in stable environments. Captain Mordak activated their portable data display and pulled up the humans' technical report from mining station Theta 9. The document was surprisingly detailed and professionally written, containing mathematical proofs and engineering diagrams that would have taken their own technical staff weeks to produce. This analysis, the captain said slowly, it describes exactly what happened here today. Yes. I predicted that a gravity ring malfunction during calibration would trigger cascade failures throughout any station using the standard hegemony gravity control architecture. I also provided detailed specifications for software modifications that would prevent the problem.
Chief Engineer Palgorath was studying the report with growing amazement.
These calculations are correct.
The resonance patterns, the frequency interactions, the cascade propagation vectors. How did you determine all of this without access to our engineering databases? Pattern analysis and reverse engineering.
Humans are very good at understanding how complex systems work by observing their behavior under different conditions. The human gestured toward the damaged detention area. I spent 3 days watching your systems operate and mapping their interaction patterns.
3 days, Commander Zektar repeated in disbelief. You learned our technology well enough to manipulate it in 3 days? Your technology isn't that different from ours in principle.
Energy conversion, field generation, computer control systems, these are universal concepts. The implementation details vary between species, but the underlying physics remains the same.
Captain Mordak was beginning to understand why the Galactic Council classified humans as a potential threat.
If they could master alien technology this quickly, they would have enormous advantages in any conflict. But there was something else bothering the captain about this situation.
If your goal was simply to demonstrate this vulnerability, why didn't you warn us before triggering the cascade failure? People could have been evacuated from dangerous areas. The human's expression grew serious. Because warnings can be ignored or dismissed. Demonstrations cannot. Your people needed to understand that this isn't a theoretical problem. It's an immediate threat to anyone living or working on stations with this design flaw. You risked lives to make a point, Lieutenant Kossal accused. I prevented deaths by forcing you to fix a problem that would have killed hundreds of people when it failed naturally. The human's voice carried absolute conviction. Cascade failures don't happen on a convenient schedule. They occur during emergencies, when you can't afford to have your life support systems collapse. Dr. Veltana was examining the scan data from the past few hours, trying to understand how the human had maintained their composure throughout the crisis. Your stress indicators remained remarkably stable even during the most dangerous phases of the gravity fluctuations. How is that possible? Training and experience. Humans learn to function under extreme stress because our planet taught us that the environment can turn deadly without warning.
We don't have the luxury of assuming that our technology will always work perfectly.
This was another disturbing revelation for the aliens.
Most civilized species had evolved in relatively stable environments and had developed technology to maintain that stability. The idea of a species that expected their technology to fail was deeply unsettling.
Chief Engineer Palgorath was reviewing the technical specifications the human had provided for preventing future cascade failures.
These modifications would require significant changes to our core gravity control protocols.
The engineering work alone would take several months.
The alternative is accepting that any minor malfunction could destroy your station, the human replied.
Is convenience more important than safety?
Captain Mordak was faced with a difficult decision.
The human had clearly committed serious crimes by destroying station property and endangering lives.
But they had also identified and resolved a critical safety issue that could have been catastrophic if left unaddressed.
How do you punish someone for saving your life?
There's another issue we need to discuss, the captain said finally. Your escape from our detention facility has implications beyond this immediate incident. If humans can break out of maximum security containment this easily, it calls into question our ability to control your species if relations become hostile. The human nodded thoughtfully.
That's a fair concern.
But, you're approaching the problem from the wrong angle. Instead of asking how to build better prisons, you should be asking why you would need to imprison us in the first place. Your species has been flagged as potentially dangerous to galactic security, Commander Zektar pointed out.
By whom? And, based on what evidence? The human's tone remained calm, but their questions were pointed. Has any human ever attacked an alien installation? Have we invaded anyone's territory or threatened their trade routes? Have we even asked for anything beyond the right to travel freely and engage in peaceful commerce?
The aliens exchanged glances.
The human was right.
Despite all the dire warnings about human capabilities, there had been no recorded instances of human aggression against alien interests. Their classification as a threat was based entirely on theoretical assessments of their potential for violence. Your military capabilities are significant, Captain Mordak said carefully. The analysis suggests that humans could pose a serious threat if they chose to become hostile.
So could you, if you decided to attack Earth? The hegemony has weapons that could sterilize our entire planet. Should we classify you as an existential threat and start building defenses against you? Dr. Veltana was finding this conversation fascinating from a xenobiological perspective. What the human is describing is a classic security dilemma.
Each side's defensive preparations appear threatening to the other side, leading to an escalating cycle of mistrust and militarization.
Exactly, the human agreed. The solution isn't better weapons or stronger prisons. It's building relationships based on mutual benefit rather than mutual fear. Chief Engineer Palgorath had been quietly running calculations while listening to the conversation.
Captain, implementing the human's gravity control modifications would not only improve our safety, it would also increase our operational efficiency by approximately 12%.
The engineering principles they're suggesting could be applied to other systems as well. You're saying they could help us improve our technology? Significantly. Their approach to redundancy and failure tolerance is unlike anything in our current engineering philosophy.
The human stepped forward slightly, careful not to make any movements that might be interpreted as threatening.
This is what I was trying to tell the people on mining station Theta 9. Humans don't want to conquer or destroy alien civilizations. We want to learn from you and share what we've learned.
But that requires mutual respect and open communication. Captain Mordak was beginning to see the broader implications of this incident. The human had demonstrated capabilities that were truly impressive, but they had used those capabilities to solve problems rather than create them. Perhaps the real threat wasn't human aggression, but human competence in areas where other species felt vulnerable.
If we were to consider some form of technical cooperation, the captain said slowly, what would you require in return?
Freedom to travel, freedom to work, and freedom to be treated as equals rather than potential enemies.
We don't need special privileges or preferential treatment. We just want the same opportunities that are available to other species. Lieutenant Kossal had been listening to the conversation with growing unease. Captain, are we seriously considering releasing a prisoner who destroyed station property and endangered lives?
Lieutenant, this prisoner also saved our station and, possibly our lives, Dr. Veltana pointed out.
Without their intervention, the cascade failure could have resulted in total structural collapse. The human created the crisis in the first place. No, the human said quietly. Your flawed engineering created the crisis. I simply revealed it before it could manifest naturally at the worst possible moment. Commander Zektar had been reviewing the damage reports from throughout the station. Captain, the final casualty count is 17 injured, none seriously. Property damage is significant but reparable. If the humans' predictions are correct, a natural cascade failure could have killed hundreds. Captain Mordak made a decision that would reshape interspecies relations for generations to come. The charges against the human are dismissed.
Furthermore, I'm recommending that they be granted technical consultant status and assigned to work with our engineering teams to implement the safety modifications they've proposed.
Sir! Lieutenant Kossal protested. This sets a dangerous precedent. We can't reward criminals simply because they possess useful skills. Lieutenant, sometimes the greatest service to justice is recognizing when our previous judgments were wrong. The captain turned to the human. Will you accept this arrangement? The human considered the offer for a moment before responding.
I'll accept, with one condition. I want permission to contact Earth and inform my government about these technical issues.
Other human engineers should be involved in developing long-term solutions. This request sent a ripple of unease through the assembled aliens.
The idea of allowing humans to coordinate their technical knowledge was terrifying to species that had grown comfortable with their technological superiority. That would require approval from the Galactic Council, Captain Mordak said carefully.
Then, get approval. Because this problem isn't limited to your station or even your species' technology.
The gravitational control systems I've seen throughout this sector are all based on similar design principles.
They're all vulnerable to cascade failures. Chief Engineer Palgorath looked stricken. You're saying this flaw exists throughout the entire hegemony infrastructure network?
And, probably in the collective systems, and the academic brotherhood's installations, and anywhere else that uses centralized gravity control with insufficient failure isolation.
The human's expression was grim.
This is a sector-wide safety crisis waiting to happen.
The implications were staggering.
If the human was correct, then thousands of stations and ships throughout known space were vulnerable to catastrophic failures.
The economic and social disruption would be unprecedented. How long do we have before these failures start occurring naturally? Captain Mordak asked. Impossible to predict.
Cascade failures are triggered by specific combinations of circumstances that might happen tomorrow or might not happen for decades. But probability analysis suggests that you'll see the first major incident within the next standard year.
Dr. Veltana was already thinking about the research possibilities. If humans can identify these kinds of systematic flaws, what other vulnerabilities might exist in our technology that we haven't recognized?
That's exactly the right question to be asking, the human replied. And it's exactly why you need to start working with us instead of fearing us. Captain Mordak activated their communicator.
Communications, priority transmission to Galactic Council emergency session. Classification, critical infrastructure threat. Request immediate approval for expanded human technical cooperation protocols.
As the captain began dictating their report, the humans sat back down on their makeshift seat and watched the aliens work. They had accomplished far more than they had originally hoped when they decided to remove their gravity ring. Not only had they proven their point about the technical vulnerabilities, they had opened the door to genuine cooperation between species. But they also knew that this was just the beginning. Convincing the Galactic Council to accept human involvement in critical infrastructure would be far more challenging than fixing a cascade failure. There were political and cultural barriers that would be much harder to overcome than technical problems. The real test was yet to come. 6 months after the Nexus Station incident, the emergency session of the Galactic Council was finally reaching its conclusion. Representatives from 47 different species had spent weeks debating the human proposal for sector-wide infrastructure cooperation, and the arguments had grown increasingly heated as the implications became clear. The human delegation sat quietly at their assigned table, observing the alien politicians with the same analytical intensity they had once applied to understanding gravity control systems. Their leader, Dr. Sarah Chen, had been selected specifically because of her ability to remain calm under pressure and her expertise in both engineering and diplomacy. The motion before the council, announced Presider Velthak, their voice carrying across the vast chamber through translation systems, is to grant humans restricted access to critical infrastructure databases for the purpose of identifying and correcting systematic design flaws. The debate period has concluded. We will now proceed to final statements before the vote. Representative Morgoth of the Hegemony Defense Corps rose to address the chamber. Their species had been among the strongest opponents of human involvement, despite the fact that their own stations had benefited dramatically from the technical improvements implemented after the Nexus Station crisis. Honored colleagues, Morgoth began, their forearms gesticulating for emphasis, we must not allow fear to override our judgment in this matter. Yes, the humans have demonstrated impressive technical capabilities.
But, granting them access to our most sensitive systems would create vulnerabilities that could be exploited in ways we cannot anticipate. Dr.
Chen had heard variations of this argument dozens of times over the past 6 months.
The underlying fear was always the same: if humans understood alien technology well enough to fix it, they might also understand it well enough to use it as a weapon. Senator Crix-Nal of the Collective spoke next, their hive mind nature allowing them to present multiple perspectives simultaneously. The statistical evidence supports human claims about systematic infrastructure vulnerabilities.
In the 6 months since the Nexus Station incident, we have identified 17 additional cascade failure points within our own networks. However, the security implications of expanded cooperation remain concerning. The Academic Brotherhood's representative, Scholar Zenthara, had prepared extensive mathematical models supporting the human position.
The probability calculations are clear.
Without systematic infrastructure improvements, we face a 73% likelihood of major cascade failures within the next 2 standard years. The human methodology offers our best hope of preventing catastrophic losses.
Ambassador Thelmos of the Trade Federation was focused on the economic implications.
The cost of implementing human-designed safety protocols is significant, but the potential losses from infrastructure failures would be devastating to interstellar commerce.
From a purely financial perspective, cooperation with humans represents the most cost-effective approach to risk mitigation.
Dr. Chen listened to each statement carefully, noting the underlying concerns that drove each species' position.
The hegemony feared military vulnerability.
The collective worried about technological dependence.
The Academic Brotherhood focused on mathematical certainty.
The Trade Federation calculated profit and loss. Each group was approaching the same problem from their own cultural perspective, which was exactly what made the situation so complex. When her turn came to speak, Dr. Chen rose slowly and walked to the central podium. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but she knew that the success or failure of human integration into galactic society might depend on the next few minutes. Honored representatives, she began, her voice clear and steady through the translation systems. 6 months ago, one of my colleagues demonstrated a critical flaw in your gravity control systems by triggering a controlled cascade failure. That demonstration was dramatic, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as delegates recalled the reports from Nexus Station. The incident had become legendary throughout known space, both as an example of human technical capability and as a warning about the vulnerability of established systems. Since then, my species has worked with your engineers to identify and correct similar vulnerabilities in over 200 installations. We've prevented 17 potential cascade failures, improved operational efficiency by an average of 15%, and saved an estimated 40,000 lives. Representative Morgoth interrupted, and, in the process, you've gained detailed knowledge of our most sensitive technologies.
How do we know you won't use that knowledge against us?
Dr. Chen had expected this question. Because our actions speak louder than our words.
In 6 months of unprecedented access to your infrastructure, have any humans attempted sabotage, espionage, or any other hostile action?
Not yet, Morgoth replied.
But intentions can change.
So can yours, Dr. Chen pointed out. You have weapons capable of destroying Earth, trade networks that could strangle our economy, and political influence that could isolate us from the galactic community.
Should we refuse to work with you because you might someday become our enemies? Scholar Zenthara spoke up from the Academic Brotherhood section. The human raises a valid point about mutual vulnerability. However, the asymmetry in technical knowledge remains a concern. Humans appear to understand our systems better than we understand theirs.
That's because you haven't asked to study our systems, Dr. Chen replied.
We've been completely transparent about our technological capabilities.
We've shared our design philosophies, our safety protocols, and our engineering methodologies.
If you want to understand human technology better, we're happy to teach you.
This offer sent another wave of discussion through the chamber. The idea of aliens studying human technology was almost as unsettling as the reverse situation.
Senator Crix-Nal posed the next challenge: human technology appears to be based on fundamentally different principles than our own. Your systems assume constant failure and environmental hostility. Our systems are designed for optimal efficiency under stable conditions. These approaches may be incompatible. They're complementary, not incompatible, Dr. Chen corrected. Your technology excels in controlled environments where efficiency is paramount. Our technology performs well under chaotic conditions where reliability is critical. Combined, they create systems that are both efficient and resilient. Ambassador Thelmos had been studying the economic projections throughout the debate. Dr. Chen, your proposals would require massive infrastructure investments throughout the sector. The financial burden could destabilize entire economies. The alternative is accepting massive losses when existing infrastructure fails catastrophically. The Nexus Station incident caused 17 million credits in damage during a few hours of gravity fluctuations. A full cascade failure in a major population center could cost trillions of credits and thousands of lives. Captain Mordak, who had been granted special permission to address the council about the Nexus Station incident, stood to speak. Honored representatives, I have worked directly with humans for the past 6 months. I can testify that their technical expertise is matched by their commitment to safety and cooperation. They have consistently prioritized the welfare of all species over their own immediate interests. Captain, Representative Morgoth challenged, your objectivity may be compromised by your positive experiences with a small number of humans. How can we be certain that all humans share these cooperative intentions? Dr. Chen addressed this concern directly. You can't be certain, any more than we can be certain about all members of your species. But, you can observe our actions and judge us by our results. We're not asking you to trust us blindly. We're asking you to work with us transparently, with appropriate safeguards and oversight. Presider Velthak called for order as the debate threatened to dissolve into multiple simultaneous conversations. Dr. Chen, please present your final recommendations to the council. Dr. Chen had rehearsed this moment countless times, but she knew that the future of human-alien relations would be shaped by how well she could articulate the essential choice facing the galactic community. Representatives, you face a fundamental decision about how to respond to change. Your civilizations have achieved remarkable stability and prosperity by perfecting technologies suited to your specific needs and environments. But, that very success has made you vulnerable to systematic failures that could undermine everything you've built. She paused, allowing her words to be translated and absorbed. Humans offer you something you cannot provide for yourselves, an outside perspective that can identify problems you cannot see and solutions you haven't considered. In return, we ask for the same thing that every species in this chamber already enjoys, the right to participate as equals in galactic civilization. The technical improvements we've proposed will make your infrastructure safer, more efficient, and more resilient. But, the real value of human involvement isn't our engineering expertise. It's the diversity of thought and approach that comes from including a species with fundamentally different experiences and perspectives. Dr. Chen looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many representatives as possible. You've spent centuries building a galactic community based on the assumption that all advanced civilizations would develop along similar paths. Humans challenge that assumption by proving that there are other ways to solve problems, other approaches to technology, other methods of organizing society. If you vote to include us, you're not just accepting human assistance with infrastructure problems. You're choosing to embrace the principle that diversity strengthens civilization rather than threatening it. If you vote to exclude us, you're choosing to maintain the status quo even though you know it's vulnerable to catastrophic failure. You're prioritizing the comfort of familiar systems over the safety of your people. Dr. Chen returned to her seat, knowing that she had said everything she could. The debate was over, and the decision now rested with the representatives. Presider Velthak announced the voting procedure. Each species would cast a single vote, with a 2/3 majority required for passage. The votes would be recorded publicly, ensuring that each representative would be held accountable for their decision. The voting began with the smallest species and proceeded in order of galactic seniority. The early votes were split, with some species supporting cooperation and others expressing continued reservations about human involvement.
As the tally progressed, it became clear that the vote would be extremely close. The final decision would likely come down to the largest and most influential species, whose votes carried significant political weight beyond their numerical value. The academic brotherhood voted in favor, citing the mathematical evidence supporting human technical recommendations. The Trade Federation also supported cooperation, focusing on the economic benefits of improved infrastructure reliability. The collective's vote was delayed while their hive minds debated internally. When they finally spoke, Senator Crixenale announced the collective votes in favor of limited cooperation, with comprehensive oversight and regular review of security protocols. This left the Hegemony Defense Corps as the deciding factor. Representative Morgoth had argued strenuously against human involvement throughout the debate, but they had also witnessed the improvements at their own facilities. The chamber fell silent as Morgoth rose to cast their vote. The Hegemony Defense Corps has carefully considered the evidence presented over the past 6 months. We have observed human technical capabilities, assessed their security implications, and evaluated the potential benefits and risks of expanded cooperation. The pause seemed to last forever. Despite our reservations about the security implications, we cannot ignore the demonstrated benefits of human involvement in critical infrastructure improvement. The Hegemony votes in favor of the proposal, with the condition that all cooperation be conducted under strict security protocols and subject to immediate termination if any evidence of hostile intent is discovered. The final tally showed 32 votes in favor, 15 opposed, with the minimum required for passage. The motion had passed by the narrowest possible margin. Dr. Chen felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. They had achieved their goal of gaining acceptance into the galactic community, but the narrow victory margin meant that human actions would be scrutinized closely. Any mistake could undo years of progress and confirm the worst fears of those who had opposed cooperation. Presider Velthak made the official announcement: the motion passes. Humans are hereby granted provisional membership in the Galactic Infrastructure Cooperation Protocol, subject to the terms and conditions specified in the agreement. As the chamber erupted in discussion and debate, Dr. Chen knew that the real work was just beginning. Humans had earned the right to participate in galactic civilization, but they had also inherited the responsibility of proving that diversity truly did strengthen the community rather than threatening it. The young human engineer who had removed a gravity ring 6 months ago had sparked a revolution in interspecies relations. Now it was up to all of humanity to prove that the revolution had been worth the risk. In the end, the future would be determined not by fear or suspicion, but by the simple question of whether different species could work together to solve problems that none of them could solve alone. The answer, as humans had learned long ago on their chaotic home planet, was always yes if you were willing to try.